Twitter has brought to my attention that there are some people who don't see things the way I see them. I know, real shocking surprise there, isn't it? One of those people, when it comes to the realm of entertainment, happens to be the notorious Matt Walsh. Now, the first thing to come to mind is probably that clip of him saying that anime is satanic.
What's your opinion on anime? It's really popular amongst teens and young adults. I think it's all satanic. I have no argument for it. I have no argument for why it's satanic. It just seems that way to me. All anime to me seems weird, just like bizarre, creepy. And in general, I don't think that adults should be, whether it's anime or any other kind of cartoon, with rare exception, adults really should be watching cartoons in general, I would say.
So how do I take that? I'm not particularly sure how I should feel about it. Part of me just wants to believe that it's Matt Walsh being sarcastic and provocative like he's been in the past. But given his record as far as denigrating entertainment, I really don't know whether it is or not. As far as the argument presented, if it were serious, I would say I guess I could understand if all you did was watch Goblin Slayer and redo of Healer. You have to ignore or outright reject a lot of things about anime in order to come to the conclusion that it's satanic and creepy. Ah yes, because everyone knows that Love is War was written by Satan himself.
Shut up, dumbass!
And don't you dare watch something like Kotaro Lives Alone, because then you might as well be shouting Hail Satan at every turn of a corner.
Oh, goodness, I'm so sorry. It's just that I'm allergic to
bullshit.
So, yeah, after that initial comment that anime is satanic, he went on to say that adults shouldn't be watching cartoons in general. And that prompted a response from comic artist George Alexopoulos. Alexopoulos then took to prodding at Walsh repeatedly, challenging the man to debate him over whether animation was strictly for children or not. And when Walsh finally did respond to Alexopoulos, all he did was deflect back to the argument that he was just saying that children shouldn't be in front of screens playing violent video games all the time. In the short exchange that sort of happened, Walsh continued to claim that all he said was that children shouldn't play violent video games, which is forgetful and contradictory at best, and a lie at worst. And something that Alexopoulos never claimed the opposite of. In fact, a lot of Alexopoulos' claims were more to the point of video games aren't inherently evil and can be a good way to bond with your children. As well as, animation isn't necessarily for children, and there's a long list of great animated shows and movies that adults can enjoy. Sadly, in the end, we never got any sort of debate between these two. Likely because Matt Walsh didn't see it as something his viewers would like, and thus not an opportunity to rake in millions of views on a video. Now, it was at this point that I decided to start actually looking deeper into these things. I hadn't seen any particularly damning evidence against Matt Walsh, other than that video. And like I said, I didn't really know how to take it, because he has a tendency to be a bit provocative and over the top sometimes. I wanted to know if these were criticisms of something he had actually said, or if it was just a misinterpretation. And really, the two things I came up with were that video and a tweet from 2018 containing a broken link to an article on the topic of violent video games. But the article, once I actually found the thing, which wasn't really all that hard, it's right there on the Daily Wire website, and I will provide the link for it, pretty much confirmed what people had been saying about Matt Walsh. Now, to his credit, he actually does lay out a solid take on why letting your children sit in front of a screen playing Call of Duty all day is bad. This much I can say from experience is a good stance. But it's not a position a whole lot of people were making an argument for. Yeah, I think we can all agree that being cooped up in a place in front of a screen for the entirety of your life is not a good thing for you. All the coof lockdowns prove that much to us. But look, if that were the only position Matt Walsh would have taken in this article, I wouldn't be making this video right now. But after making a reasonable argument as to why too much screen time is bad for children, he then decides to go on a bit of a tangent about how video games are bad just for being violent. I think keeping your children as unbound from the screens as possible is a healthy and respectable stance. But when you start talking about how violence makes a video game bad, I start questioning your logic here. What about violent video games? While there's no reason to focus this part of the conversation only on kids, it's not good or healthy for anyone to play graphic, disturbing, gory video games. Certainly it won't make you a better person, and it's very hard to imagine that the effect is neutral. Nothing is really neutral for human beings. Everything we do either makes us better or makes us worse. Hours a day pretending to kill people in virtual reality must logically fall into the worst category. This part is kind of interesting, because it's the part Matt Walsh wouldn't acknowledge 5 years later. You see, the issue I have with this is, should we then ban action movies like Die Hard, Terminator, and John Wick? They're all violent. They all depict people committing acts of violence, and they can be a little bit gory at times. Does that make them evil? He starts talking about graphic and gory video games, which leads me to assume he's thinking something along the lines of Doom or Mortal Kombat. But those tend to be more the exception rather than the rule. Most so-called violent video games are no more violent than your average action movie. Otherwise, if you're talking about stuff like Fortnite, Call of Duty, and Battlefield, again, I would have to raise the topic of, should we then not watch action movies? Ever. Those games are no more graphic or gory than the standard action movie that a lot of people love. So where do we draw the line in reveling in violence? Because if those kinds of games have to go, then a lot of action movies also have to go. Should we never engage ourselves in depictions of violence ever again? Is that the ultimate conclusion I'm supposed to come to? This is where some video game apologists devolve into incoherence. Video games are a sacred cow because people are desperate to justify the last 8,000 hours of their lives that they wasted on them. So they'll often pretend there is nothing toxic about violent video games at all. They'll say something silly like, it's just pretend, I'm just shooting at pixels, it's not turning me into a serial killer. It's kind of condescending to say we defend it just because we want to justify the 8,000 hours of our lives we wasted. A lot of us come home and play video games just because it's our way of relaxing. The only people logging 8,000 hours in a video game are diehards and career gamers, which are few and far between. The vast majority of people who play these things are much more casual. They get home after a long day of school, college, or work and decide they want something to take their mind off of the real world. But if you want to talk about devolving into incoherence, how about you stop making blanket statements and attributing motive first? We all know it's pretend. We all know that the images are digital. We all know you are not a serial killer. But the fact remains that you still enjoy pretending to kill people. Your favorite recreational activity is to pretend that you are killing people. Well, if that isn't oversimplifying this subject, I don't know what is. It's like taking Die Hard and just reducing it to the point where John McClane shoots someone. Some people really just enjoy the competitive aspect of it. CSGO and Rainbow Six Siege are two excellent examples of violent video games where you pretend to kill people that have a lot more to them. They're about strategy, tactics, and making split-second decisions that could save or lose the game. They award creativity, ingenuity, and situational awareness. And they also heavily encourage working with your team. Matt Walsh's take is a very prudish interpretation of video games. He sees them only as remember no Russian gunman simulators. Games where you just sit there and slaughter innocent people the whole time. And then he wants to ignore the fact that even without video games, kids, particularly young boys, will always tend towards simulating killing things just by nature. Sticks become swords and guns. They chase around bad guys, pretending to kill each other in sword fights. So here's a hypothetical. Is milsim bad? Because it delights in one of the ugliest aspects of human nature, warfare. Is competition sword fighting bad? Because it delights in the idea of learning to use a thing intended for killing people. You probably will never kill a single person in real life. But it's still not good. It's still unhealthy. It's still pretty disturbing that you find so much joy in simulated death and destruction. I say the same thing about people who love bleak, graphic torture porn movies. A healthy, well-adjusted, morally aware person would find no enjoyment whatsoever in those films. Not because he thinks they're real, but simply because he has no interest in entertaining a fantasy world filled with blood and death. Again, the sort of prudish, condescending, morally superior attitude towards people, while misinterpreting their hobby. So where's the line? Is it just because violent video games aren't your thing and you don't like them? Or do we need to get rid of action movies and martial arts as well? And toy guns. When I was a teenager, I went, regrettably, to see the movie Hostel. For anyone who hasn't seen it, I'll spare you most of the details, but suffice it to say that the whole point of the movie, the whole attraction, is to watch young people get tortured and brutalized and hacked to pieces. I hated the movie and wished I had never seen it. My friend loved it. He should not have loved it. There is nothing to love. He has not since turned into a serial killer, as far as I know. But it's still not good for a human being to take delight in such ugliness. I love the manga Berserk. It's a very violent, very gory sometimes, and very graphic series. One that depicts a lot of dark and ugly things. But it's not something that you're meant to relish in the darkness on. It's one of those things that's more of a tragic story. The ugly, graphic violence depicted in Berserk isn't meant to be something you relish in. It's meant to be something that makes you wince, that makes you realize just how evil some of the characters involved really are. But it seems like Matt Walsh is just equating every bit of violence depicted in video games as nothing more than torture porn, which it is not. At this point, I would say you have to go out of your way to ignore all the other things just to focus in on the idea of this solely being for violence. Matt Walsh is having a similar experience in this regard as Twitter did when they discovered the eclipse. That's one of the major effects of violent video games and movies certainly do have on a person. They feed the twisted part of his brain that delights in ugliness. We all have that in us, to some extent, in one form or another. We should not indulge the instinct. We should not embrace it and fuel it. We bring ourselves into dark places when we do. Even if the dark place does not involve shooting up a school, it is still a dark place, and it is better to be in the light. The other effect is desensitization. A person should be horrified by brutality and violence. We should be sickened by it. We should not take pleasure in it, and neither should we be neutral towards it. It's clear that a lot of kids today, a lot of people generally, have a certain numbness, a certain emptiness inside them. They do not recoil at evil. They do not feel disgusted or at disgusting things. It is at least partly because they spend so much time in a disgusting virtual world, pretending to do disgusting things for fun. The issue is here, violence is not inherently evil. In fact, I think some propensity for violence is necessary in a lot of men. Some violence is better than others. The man who rushes in and beats to death an innocent person is evil. But the man who steps in to stop that and kills the attacker is not. Men should be protectors. And in order to protect, sometimes you have to resort to violence. If you want a really good video on the subject, Shad Brooks actually already did one over at Shadiversity. And in fact, it was made in response to this very same Matt Walsh spat that blew up on Twitter. But to sum it up, men are protectors, and therefore need to be capable of violence. We shouldn't relish in it or seek it out, but we should know its place in the world, and when to resort to it. The argument Matt Walsh makes is effectively that all violence is evil, and that we should abhor it. But as we can clearly lay out, it isn't all that black and white. Personally, the idea of having to resort to violent action, it terrifies me. But there have been times in my life where I was perfectly ready to throw down. Why? Because there was a situation where I actually might have needed to. And just as I can point out that there is good violence and bad violence, we can also go to the idea that there are good depictions of violence and bad depictions of violence. The idea that torture porn games like Kick the Buddy are out there should kind of disturb us, because all you do in games like that is take weapons against a defenseless little thing trapped in a box that can't get away from you. But to equate that kind of violence with the kind of violence that is depicted in stuff like CSGO and Rainbow Six Siege, that just doesn't add up. So in the end, I'm left with the question I voiced earlier in the video. Where should we draw the line? Because we can point out a bunch of other areas that don't get talked about, that depict the same level of violence as, say, Call of Duty or Battlefield. This view that people only play video games to satiate their dark desire to torture and kill is just stupid. I don't go into a game like Skyrim to go murder innocent civilians and destroy entire cities. No. I want to go explore dungeons, fight dragons, and learn magic in a world that's buggier than all hell. But I guess that's that. This is the end of the video, so thanks for listening to me rant and rave for who knows how long at this point. And if you enjoyed this, please consider liking and subscribing. You're also welcome to comment down below your own thoughts on all of this, because I don't assume that I'm right on all of this. You're all welcome to challenge me, and I'm open to hearing a few other people's perspectives. It's not like I haven't been wrong in the past before. Alright, it's time to shut my yap and go watch Mugen Train again. See ya.